On this episode,
most of what I've heard about the Ark's lore has really been tied to weaponry.
One of my favorite theories is that it was what's called a mana machine.
There's a wealth of stories as to what it was used for. Instruments of miracles.
What are the odds? And granted, I'm not saying that all of those stories are true.
I think it's totally plausible that all this Ark of the Covenant was a mobile reactor. Some sort of a power-generating device.
Raise your glass to mysteries, cocktails and conspiracies. Dive into these histories, cocktails and conspiracies. Raise your glass to mysteries, cocktails and conspiracies. Uncover those anomalies, cocktails and conspiracies.
Tonight, we're cracking open a mystery that's been buried for over 2,000 years. A golden chest built to house the literal word of God, said to part rivers, drop walls, level armies, and if you got too close, it could kill you where you stand. The Ark of the Covenant isn't just some relic from an old Bible story, it's one of the most legendary, most powerful, and most feared artifacts in recorded history. And then it vanished. No one knows for sure what happened to it. Some say it was destroyed. Some say it was hidden away beneath a mountain, and others claim it's sitting in a locked vault in Ethiopia guarded by a monk who hasn't spoke to another human in decades. We're going to explore every one of those theories and more. But tonight we're laying the groundwork, the lore, the legend, the long trail of miracles, curses, and chaos that follow wherever this thing shows up. So grab a drink, say a prayer, and whatever you do, don't open the lid. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be, whether you're tuning in across the nation or around the world. This is Cocktails and Conspiracies. We are your conspiracy realists, and my name is Shane Skwarek, here with the always eccentric Mr. Philipps. And cheers, baby. Once again, we are back. Can I get that in front of my camera? And a new mount right here. How we doing?
I'm RTR ready to rock, baby. You'll notice that I'm fully decked out because by the time this airs, MLB will be in full swing. And I have two things to say about that. LMFG and LFGM.
All right, well, there he goes. No wonder he was asking me. So you guys missed part of this in the intro. Is before we actually came on live, Mr. Phillips was asking me when this was going to air. He was really concerned about it. And I thought it had more to do with, keeping up our cadence on YouTube. But I think it has more to do with the fact that he just wants to get the Mets thing out there, get it going, get some good hype. Maybe before things crash and burn. You don't want to see the jersey on if things go to shit. Maybe just get some good juju. I don't know, Mr. Phillips. It's all you.
The jersey will never come off. I'm gonna wear it once a day, every day for at least a minute. How about that?
Okay.
That's my commitment to the New York Mets this season. For a minimum of 1 minute, I'll throw it on.
That's fair.
It'll be worn every day.
I'll take that.
162 days starting tomorrow. Let's go.
Oh, my goodness. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Ark of the Covenant, which has sort of been a low-hanging fruit for us in the conspiracy world. And it's one of those topics that I think we intentionally avoided because we didn't want to go down the rabbit hole of what every single other podcast has covered to exhaustion. However, Mr. Phillips was scrolling through our analytics on some of our shorts, and what did you find? You muted yourself, so I suppose you found a mute button.
I did. I found a mute button.
Right there. Yep.
But I also found that the Ark of the Covenant is what the people want to see. The people demand the Ark.
It was kind of mind-boggling to me that one of our shorts that we had done, which is this shout out to Vicky Sue. She works behind the scenes. She was on an earlier episode that we did the Bermuda Triangle and the disappearance of Gonzalo Zing. One of the very first episodes, but she works a lot behind the scenes. I'm working on the website and some of the social media content for us. So big shout out to Vicky. But she actually put this one together because she loves the Ark of the Covenant. And that was one of our most viewed shorts or reels, depending if you're watching on Instagram or YouTube. And so that really became a softball for us that you guys want to see. you guys and gals, want to see some stuff about the Ark of the Covenant. So here we are. We're going to do something a little different than we normally do, and that's to try to break this up into 3 episodes that are going to be a little more easily digestible. Might be 3. We're saying that right now. By the time we finish this, maybe we cut it into less. Maybe we don't know. But that's what we're targeting for, because there's a lot to cover here, and we want to make sure we get a full picture here.
Listen,
Mr. Philipps, you on board?
A little inside baseball here for everybody. Almost every time we record, we say, hey, why don't we keep this one to about a half hour, 45 minutes? Yep. And then we just bullshit back and forth so long that before you know it, an hour and a half has gone by and we're like, God damn it, we did it again.
And we have so much ground that we want to cover in these episodes, even when we go an hour and a half, that sometimes even when we go through that, we didn't even cover half what we generally don't. Right, and we speed ourselves up and sometimes slow ourselves down because we're so worried about hitting that time, and for whatever reason, here we are anyway. In any case, here we go. Ark of the Covenant, 5 minutes in, talking about bullshit, and we're already doing that.
We're off to a great start.
Off to a great start here. So I guess the easiest place to start here is just some context. And I'm going to use this because I think most people know what the Ark of the Covenant is. However, I guess before me going into like this conspiracy theory journey, I mean, I kind of knew what it was, kind of didn't. I really just sort of knew it as like that movie for Indiana Jones that they were trying to chase down and steal from the Nazis, which we'll play into our discussion here today.
When the dude's face melts off.
When the dude's face melts off, exactly.
Right.
Melting powers, right? So the Ark of the Covenant is described in the Hebrew Bible, so this is not just speculation that's made up through legend. It is in the Hebrew Bible as an ornate gold-plated wooden chest built around 3,000 years ago, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up an image of that here in just a second, to house the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments. So I said I will share a quick screen share for you all right here. Here we go. And as I narrate through this, it'll give you a better visual here for those watching on YouTube or on Spotify video. It's topped by 2 golden cherubim, or angels, as you can see, along the top right there. It kind of looks like eagles, if you ask me, but they are angels. And they're carried. It's carried using poles by priests. The ark was kept in the inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, of the Israelites' mobile tabernacle, and later in King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. It symbolized the very presence, Mr. Philipps, of God among the people, and was treated with the utmost reverence. It's one of the most sacred artifacts you could have had at that time. At times, even worshipped as the embodiment of God itself. Historical journey a little bit here. According to the biblical narratives, the ark traveled with the Israelites during the Exodus and the conquest of, I want to say this is Canaan. You know what I'm talking about?
Could be.
Canaan, am I saying that right?
I know what you're talking about. I wouldn't be able to pronounce it any better.
We're not good with pronunciation here, guys. I think you guys should know that by now. But
no, listen, episode 1, we told you we're a bunch of idiots that just like to talk about cool stuff, so just, keep that in mind.
I'm going to try to look it up real quick, so I'm not getting... Yeah, that's right. Canaan. Okay, so I was close.
Canaan, you were close.
Good. We were good. I'm going to chalk that up as a win for us. It was carried into battles and led processions. King David brought it to Jerusalem, and Solomon enshrined it in the first temple. The ark's trace then vanishes from recorded history, around 587, 586 BC, when Jerusalem was sacked by the Babylonians and Solomon's temple was destroyed. So whether it was destroyed, captured, or hidden away at this time remains a mystery, a source of speculation, and the entire reason we are here to do this episode today. Now, as we jump into some of the legendary powers that are tied into the lore of the Ark of the Covenant, Mr. Philipps, I want to throw the microphone over to you here real quick. What is a power or a piece of lore that you heard about the Ark that maybe has kind of stuck with you at this point, that maybe you subscribe to, maybe you only just have heard about?
Yeah, one of my favorite ones, because I believe I got this from Ancient Aliens. I don't know. I've watched too many things, read too many things. My brain is flooded. But one of my favorite theories is that it was what's called and I'm going to attempt to pronounce this, a mana machine. I don't know if it's actually pronounced mana, but that was essentially like a flat bread that the Israelites used for food as they were, through Exodus, as they were, traveling the desert. And so that not only was it used to house those stone tablets, but it was actually a machine that fed the Israelites. That's one of my favorite ones.
I don't know mana as a bread, but you are right. That is the mana machine. That is a thing that's out there. I actually just knew mana from like The Rock always talks about mana. It was in the movie Moana, and it means earth as well. But yeah, the machine allegedly used algae or some other biological matter as a base and required a power source, which is the Ark.
Right.
And operated at night, had to be clean, couldn't produce just enough food to feed the population. Coincidentally, there. That's the first time I've actually ever heard about that. So I'm not really sure where you heard about that. I watched all the Ancient Alien episodes.
I feel like it was Ancient Aliens. I could be, like I said, dude, I've read so much, read and watched, and there's just so much shit about everything over the past years. I mean, who knows? Who knows?
Well, there's so many episodes there, and sometimes I just kind of like drift off because it just gets so redundant. Most of what I've heard about the Ark's lore has really been tied to weaponry or power greater than just building a machine to make food, right? Which I guess is a good derivative of why you might use a super powered reactor. And that's probably a nice segue into what I've heard it being, that it's almost like a mobile reactor, a mobile nuclear reactor, if you will.
Right.
There's a wealth of stories as to what it was used for. Instruments of miracles. So they have suggested through writings that it's cleared impediments and poisonous creatures from the Israelis' paths during a wilderness journey. When the priests were carrying the ark and stepped into the Jordan River, the river miraculously stopped flowing and allowed the whole nation to cross on dry ground because the ark's presence sanctified the ground and made the impossible happen. Does that sound like a story to you at all?
It sounds like Moses.
It sounds like Moses,
Sounds just like Moses parting the Red Sea.
Parting the Red... Wow, look at you even remember the Red Sea. My goodness.
Dude, I mean, I did go to Catholic school for a little while before they asked me to...
Before
they so kindly asked me to leave.
CCD, not Catholic school for me.
No, I went to both. I went to CCD and I actually went to Catholic school. For one
you got booted out of there?
I got a nice red stamp on my final report card that said 3 failures, must removal from school, and my mother cried that day. I hated it. I absolutely hated it.
Probably a story when I get your mother with a couple cocktails in her, and she can tell us the conspiracy of the school. So that was the first thing that came to my mind as well, is Moses parting the Red Sea during the Exodus. And so I looked that up really quickly. Both events, ironically, become symbolic turning points, where the Red Sea is the escape from bondage, and the Jordan River is the entry into promise, into Canaan.
Right.
So thematically, it's like bookends of the liberation, and in both cases, the water is now yielding to this divine. So I thought that was an interesting parallel that the ark was used here, not necessarily mentioned in Moses parting the Red Sea, but potentially, if this thing does exist, maybe that is the scientific explanation to what it was.
Right, and I guess we would kind of need something called ChatGPT and or a religious historian to tell me whether or not he procured the tablets prior to Exodus, or if that was post. I'm not really sure. So what the ark would have been with them. But when I say them, I mean Moses when he parted the Red Sea.
Could have been built for them, right?
Right, I have no idea.
Well, you can ChatGPT that. Now I'm going to talk about weapons of war.
Let's go.
The ark's other main use was in battles, and the ark was seen as this source of victory. When the Israelites besieged the city of Jericho, they marched in the ark around the walls. They marched the ark around the walls for 7 days, and on the 7th day, with trumpets, blast, and shout, the walls collapsed, and a legendary triumph attributed to the ark's power. Another episode, when we get to that part, we're going to talk about the arks being captured by the Philistines, which is Israel's enemies, and it wrought havoc to their cities, bringing plagues, illnesses, and even causing their idol Dagon to fall and shatter. So terrified by these afflictions, they quickly returned the ark to Israel. So
one quick note about that I find really interesting, and we'll deep dive into this much later, but you mentioned a reactor, right? When you say the word reactor, my mind goes to what? Nuclear reactor, right?
Yep.
So the Philistines, not only were they plagued by plagues, rats, locusts, but tumors as well, right? So for me, that kind of there's a connection there between, hey, if this was a nuclear reactor and these guys were fucking with it in a way that it shouldn't have been, well, that makes sense why they would have suffered from cancerous tumors and things of that nature.
And that's why I've really liked that explanation of what the ark could have potentially been is, and not to jump ahead too much here, but is this an alien artifact, or is it we've talked a lot about on our show specifically ancient technologies and how we believe, the two of us and hopefully most of our fans out there, that we all believe that there was some sort of technological advancement or power in history before our civilizations have come up. What you just mentioned, Tim, makes perfect sense. If you're too close to a nuclear reactor, if you're handling it incorrectly, we know now what happens. You can be poisoned, right?
Yeah.
Radiation poisoning. And those are all symptoms of radiation poisoning, is the sickness, is the burns, is the cancer, the tumors. So very interesting to see that. And again, we're going to dive into that once we talk about Temple Mount, but just a good one to kind of pivot off and give some context to her. The ark could also be deadly to those who disrespected it or inadvertently touched it, kind of building on what we were just saying there. There's a biblical account, a man named Uzzah, which just reminds me of kind of like a hip hop song or something from the 90s. Or like, what was that? Like a Kazaa? Was that Shaq film? You remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Kazam? Yeah.
Kazam.
You get the idea.
No, Kazaa was what we used to download.
Oh, that's right. The music.
We used to download music and porn on.
Yes. There we go. You're right. Mostly music, right?
Mostly porn for me, but
It was struck dead simply for touching the ark when he tried to steady it during transport. So again, this underscores the ark's fear for holiness. Only designated priests should be able to handle it, or were able to handle it, and did so with the utmost care. So again, circling back to kind of what you just said, is somebody comes up, they slap their hand on this thing. If this thing is active, right, and they just grab onto it, they just get a shock wave sent through their body, and they just drop dead on the spot. You're thinking from a reactor standpoint, any sort of a generator of any sort of power of that magnitude. Yeah. That would leave speculation as to how are the priests, now as designated ones, able to carry this or maneuver this forward.
Well, it was carried on poles, supposedly, right? So when we looked at that photo, which is really just at the end of the day a rendition of the ark, nobody actually knows what in God's name it looked like. But if it was carried on poles, that would be a way to transport it without actually touching it.
Correct. Yeah. And I'm wondering if maybe they didn't have some sort of garb or uniform or something that was maybe serving as more of like a reactor type suit.
Like when you get an X-ray.
When you get an X-ray, right? Ooh. So we don't know, because remember the priests would have been dressed differently and they're treated differently because of their stature. So it's very plausible that the materials that they were wearing had some sort of protection against them, hypothetically. I don't know if they were wearing gloves or anything at that time, but I'm just speculating here. Of course, all of these things happening lends into the ideas of the supernatural. And so the ark is described in various texts as radiating this otherworldly force. Supernatural, or again, could be some sort of generating power. One of our favorites, Graham Hancock, note in the Sign of the Seal that the ancient sources speak of the arks as blazing with fire and light, stopping rivers and blasting whole armies. So in essence, it's seen as this divine weapon or tool with this tremendous power that could unleash this deadly energy on the ark's enemies, or the holders of the ark's enemies. Again, pop culture now echoes this idea we talked about before. Raiders of the Lost Ark depicts the ark's opening the lid and just this fiery destruction among those unweary Nazis. But
is that when his face melted off? That's when his face melted off.
At the very end, yeah.
Yeah. That was such a good part.
Melt your face.
As a young kid watching that, because that came out in the 80s before we were born. So I probably watched that for the first time when I was 6, 7 years old, and I was like, oh, holy shit.
And I mean that. It's not even CGI. That was practical effects. Those hold up pretty well today. I mean, they're a little cheesy, when you see the skeleton at the end.
It's still
good,
but
for the most part, the melting of the face, for the practical. That's why I love practical effects. Again, not to deviate off here, but it really does hold up pretty well to today, which is pretty cool. We kind of beat to death Indiana Jones a little bit, so I'm not going to talk about that in terms of pop culture, but it does also appear in a number of novels, video games, TV shows. Ancient Aliens, as you mentioned before, speculated that the Ark is extraterrestrial. Ancient Aliens shouldn't give that away too much. And it was just too powerful for mankind, which is why it's gone. And perhaps it's still here, but secret societies are guarding it here. Which is a nice kind of, again, segue, not to, I hate using the same word twice, especially in the same episode, but segue into
Do you feel like a hack?
Some of the conspiracies.
You're a hack.
Do I feel like a hack? You think?
Yeah, you're a hack. Maybe. Using. Expand your vocabulary, man. Jesus.
I really do. I like to just use different words each time.
Right, well, it's a challenge. It's a challenge for next episode.
Better about it, right? It's just more of a mental note. Some of the conspiracy theories and speculations here, Mr. Phillips. I'm going to ask. No, I'm not going to ask you this yet. Okay. I'm not going to ask you your opinion on it yet.
Okay.
There are 3 to 4 major buckets that the Ark of the Covenant tends to fall under. ancient technology, which kind of crosses over into alien technology, alien artifacts. I think those are kind of one and the same here. There's Nazi and occult interests in there, and then there's secret societies. There's also the idea of prophecies and the divine secrecy. Of those four, where do we want to start?
Oh, holy moly. Let's go with secret societies.
Okay, secret societies. The Knights Templar is another big topic that you and I haven't discussed, and I learned, I guess...
I don't know how we've gone this long without talking about them, but...
Because that's another one where I feel like it's like such a low-hanging fruit, and there's been so much covered on the Knights Templar everywhere else, and I've never really cared enough to go down that road, but I'm starting to, again, see it manifest in different areas. And I don't know if it was with Dr. Ed Barnhard that we brought it up, and that's when your eyes lit up, or it was another episode we did, but you really got it. Maybe it was with Todd Feehan when we talked about Phantom Time. One of the two of them that really got your interest spiking. So I suspect that's going to be a derivative episode from here at some point.
Oh, yeah.
This is a medieval crusader order that are often linked to the Ark legends. There are a lot of theories that are claiming that the Templars discovered the Ark and other treasures beneath Temple Mount in Jerusalem during the Crusades and smuggled it out to Europe. So that obviously ties the Ark to other conspiracy favorites like the Freemasons, the Vatican, hidden vaults like Oak Island, which you were big on that show too.
Oh, I love Oak Island. I love blackened wood. That's all they ever find is blackened wood, but I keep on watching.
Like 18 seasons of that show, and they haven't found jack shit there.
Nothing but blackened wood.
There's obviously no historical proof that the Templars found the Ark, but the notion of this secret group guarding the Ark's location or using its power seems to be kind of a recurring theory here.
Right, and we know that the Knights Templar were in Jerusalem, right? Like that's kind of the only. To your point, there's no writing, there's nothing stating that they found it, that they were ever in possession of it. You're just piecing together what the Knights Templar were. They were very rich. How did they become that rich? Listen, we know they operated as sort of a bank, but they accrued their currency almost overnight in terms of like establishing it, which is odd. And we know they were in Jerusalem, right? So could they have potentially, I don't know, excavated Solomon's Temple? I mean, it was already in ruins at that point, but could they have excavated and found something? Who knows?
I think the same can really be applicable to the Vatican as well. We've heard a lot about the Vatican's secret archives and how there's quite literally nobody that knows what's down there. Yeah. And this thing goes on for miles long. That's another episode that I think we're going to have to do at some point and really dive deep into what that is and maybe all the mystery surrounding that one. But that one fascinates me a lot too because they are very tight-lipped. We're going to touch that a little bit when we talk about Ethiopia because there's a lot of parallels that are joined there. But that one to me has always been just this like halo, pardon the pun, just kind of hanging over a lot of these conspiracies is because I feel like there's a lot more going on with the Vatican than we're very much aware about. And the fact that they have these archives that have more than just speculatively about the actually, I can't even say this other word because it flagged us the last time, but the and then like, we wear a hat like a visor. There's a device like that that's supposedly there that they have, like that was created. Whether it worked or not is reason for speculation, but that's supposedly there too. So if I had to wager anything, the Vatican always seems like an easy spot for me to land.
Well, dude, look, I mean, the Vatican is, what other religion has their own city, right? I mean, okay, I guess
Jerusalem.
The Jewish people have Israel, I get that, right? But outside of that, like, dude, they have their own city. They have, they don't abide by Italian law, right? Like they're an independent nation, if you will, inside Italy. So, I mean, the power that the Vatican holds is absolutely just unimaginable. And it would actually, you know what? It'd be fun to get Todd on to talk about the Vatican, right? Because Todd is, I mean, he is all-knowing when it comes to the history of religion and the Vatican and the popes. And, I mean, do they have the power to do whatever they want? So, who knows what they have.
That's your cue, Todd. We're going to do Vatican Archives. You're going to be our special guest for that one. So get your notes prepared, baby. We'd be behooved to talk about secret societies and then not immediately parlay into Adolf and Nazis in World War II. And I don't think it's too much new information for most people, that the Nazis were very much into occult theories, from the bell that they were trying to create, like basically their version of a UFO, to trying to discover time travel. I think this became popularized from Indiana Jones, that the idea that Adolf and the SS were actively searching for this as a weapon for the Third Reich.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though that's fictional, that was actually pulled from true lore. Like, it actually did happen. That leadership, one of the names that was listed here was Heinrich Himmler. And,
yes, he was a big occultist.
Yeah. So, and there was like an Honorarby. I'm not sure how to pronounce that one too. So don't crucify me for that one. But they were obsessed with occult artifacts and holy relics, scouring the world for items like the Holy Grail, Spear of Destiny, obviously the Ark of the Covenant, and being these biblical super weapons that they thought that they can use. And a lot of, our science today, after the war was over and, Operation Paperclip, or pulling in scientists to fund our own sciences, are because of this research that they were trying to do, or these explorations or expeditions they were trying to do to find these things. When you look at World War II and you look at it with that context, does the idea of conquest change for you at all, Mr. Philipps?
Not really. I mean, dude, we know 100% that Heinrich Himmler was searching for the Ark. We know 100% that, I mean, that's not, there's no question there. I mean, this historical fact that they were on the search for the Ark.
I mean, more in the perspective of, all right, so there's a lot of different conversations. We got to walk lightly here to navigate policy, but there's context of why that happens. What are your motives behind going into all of this? And as I learn more about Adolf and his party's occult ambitions, I tend to start to think too, is the idea of conquest and going to these other countries and trying to take them over, is that may be motivated by the search for some of these relics, where if you went and you took over Vatican City, then you now have access to the archives. Then they're yours. If you went and then took over some of these other places like Temple Mount, you took over Jerusalem, like you start to go to these ancient cities that the lore ties to these artifacts. Once you take them, like, there's always the questions like, why don't the Egyptians open up the pyramids of Giza, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if somebody with more power came in and wanted to know and they took over, well, they can do whatever they want.
Sure.
And so I know that is not the motivations behind it, especially accepted. This is purely speculation out there. Everyone watching, or everyone scanning this for whatever kind of context you're looking for, but it's just something that just kind of sat in the back of my mind, that if you scrape away the big motive that's on there, the one that's plastered through schools, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, right? I think that he and that whole party wanted conquest because, listen, it helped to their agenda, right? That's first and foremost. But you also have to remember, I mean, I think he did a good point of articulating how some top folks, specifically Hitler himself and Himmler, and there were many others as well, were they were esoteric, very, very big into the occult. You also have to remember that he was whacked out on crank constantly, right? Like, it's no secret at this point that he was a heavy amphetamine user, also LSD, right? So who knows what visions of grandeur that they had in their minds, that procuring some of these mystical, powerful artifacts might have helped them, rule the entire world one day. Again, I don't think that it necessarily started with that. Like, I don't think that the reason for the conquest was because of that, but I think it certainly could have fueled their ambitions a little bit more, if that makes sense.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. I think one of the most important things when you're talking about a lot of the legends and the lore of the Ark of the Covenant is trying to distinguish symbolic truth from literal truth. So religious significance from physical evidence. Of course, there's no actual scientific proof of the Ark's powers. All we have is historical and biblical accounts.
Listen, there's no proof that it existed and was a real thing. I mean, we're going off of old text, right?
Right. I mean, I think for all intents and purposes, if you have any stake in any religious texts having any semblance of truth, we can assume that something like the Ark existed. I think there's enough text, there's enough literature on it to assume that it existed. And I think most people in that space, right, in that range of belief will tell you that the Ark really existed, just like Noah's Ark really existed.
Sure.
It's within the context of how strong was its powers, how much was its influence really. I think skeptics would argue, and not suggesting that we're in favor or opposed to this, that a lot of these miraculous stories, these miraculous accounts are just exaggerated or metaphorical over time. National Geographic archaeologist Fred Heibert put it, when it comes to the Ark, that we are dealing with, quote unquote, things at the crossroads between myth and reality. I think that's a really well-spoken statement, because that's exactly what it is. It's not really possible to prove or disprove it until we actually have this here, but that any ancient legend is true. But I do wonder, I mean, to your point, we can't really prove much of anything. We really can't definitively prove its existence, but the secrecy that's wrapped around it when you talk to religious groups, whether, it's the Jews, the Catholics, whether it's the Ethiopians, everybody seems to indicate that this does exist, and nobody seems to want to say if they have it or not. They all claim, there's different groups that claim that they might have it, but nobody really knows where it is or what goes on behind it. So just with anything in religion, it's always interesting to me, how do you navigate through multiple things? And this goes back to kind of the ancient alien theory too, which we touched on, touched on again, dodged again. But is it a matter of this thing existing and people that were transcribing this didn't really know how to describe it? Is it people exaggerating over periods of time? Stories get told, and by the time they're written down, it's misconstrued. Is it a translation issue with, the verbiage, the vocabulary that existed then? They couldn't use the same word more than one time when they were writing in a Bible right there. They weren't
hacks.
as us in Cocktails and Conspiracies. It could be any amalgamation of that. It could just be people just regurgitating exactly what they see, the way they see it, and everything in the Bible, everything in all these religious texts, everything in the Hebrew Bible. It's all true. Don't know. And I think we've kind of talked about that quite a bit on a lot of other episodes. So, Mr. Philipps, that comes to my question to you that I was going to bring up before, but I thought it's probably a little more apropos here. If, assuming the Ark of the Covenant exists, do you think it's more likely that it was science, technology, or magic, the divine?
Being a logical thinker, I think that if it does possess any sort of powers other than it just being a box that holds the tablets that are inscribed the Ten Commandments on it, I think it's more likely to be science. I think it's more likely that it is a piece of technology that, for whatever reason that you just articulated, whether they didn't, it's something they literally never saw before, right? It's like going back to 1400 and handing somebody your Android phone and them going, that's a magic box, right? I'm going to write the story about this little magic box that's in my hand. They wouldn't know how to describe it any other way. It's that, or possibly just, just some confusion in translation, right? I mean, even in modern day times, there is some, even though you can translate at this point for the most part any language into other language, there are some words in specific languages that don't have a true definition or meaning in another language. And so, I mean, there are so many variables there that who knows, right? I mean, these stories were written in so many different languages and told and translated so many times. Who knows? But I would be willing to say it's more likely a piece of technology. What about you?
Oh, no. We're not playing that game yet, my man. I got some follow-up questions for you.
All right.
You'll get my opinions.
I didn't know I was being interviewed. I thought I was a co-host, but go ahead.
You are, but I need to get your perspective first, so then I can kind of, play off of that a little bit. After our Richard Serrett episode, when I had to do all the talking, now we're flipping the tables here, my friend. Which, by the way, go check that out, Strange Planet. We were just on there. A little nerve-wracking to be interviewed ourselves, but well worth it your listen. So, thinking of it from the perspective of science, I mean, I guess that I don't want to use the word man-made, but I think we're in agreement then that it is most likely a crafted thing. It's not some sort of a divine power that's existing that was just sort of zapped here biblically.
But that's where it gets really weird.
I'm not using the word man-made, so I'm gonna circle back to that. But that's the easiest word I can use.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
Right. It's crafted. So do you think now that this ark is more a symbol of faith or an object of power? And what I mean by that is it more symbolic in that marching down into war or into controversy with this ark was an empowering item, no different than wearing a cross around your neck? Or did it actually have power? Was it actually that reactor or some sort of a weapon? What's more likely to you?
I think it's way more likely that it's a symbol, right? Like the odds of, just think about it, statistically speaking, what are the odds that 3,000 years ago, a group of Israelites were just handed this awesome piece of machinery that can do all of these different things? It could strike a man dead when he touches it. It could blast the walls of Jericho. It could feed people in a desert. Like, what are the odds? And granted, I'm not saying that all of those stories are true, right? I mean, again, we just talked about who knows what in God's name is actually true. But having said that, I think it's far more likely that it's just symbolism.
Interesting. I wasn't expecting that answer from you, actually. Yeah. And so that's where I'm going to chime in.
We are the conspiracy realists.
We are the conspiracy realists. And this is where my realism is going to come in here a little bit and try to correct your all of a sudden big guy in faith. I actually think the opposite. And I agree with you wholeheartedly in terms of the idea that it's science. It's probably crafted at some degree. I think, though, that it was an object of power. And I think that because I still subscribe to the idea that there was a level of technology beyond what we think there was millennia ago.
Agreed.
Thousands of years ago. I guess maybe not millennia ago, but thousands of years ago. Potentially millennia ago as well. I think that if we are to believe that the pyramids were ancient power plants, which, again, is something that I do subscribe to a degree, or that there was some degree of like wireless energy or energy power there, I think it's totally plausible that all this Ark of the Covenant was a mobile reactor, some sort of a power generating device. I'm suggesting necessarily that it's nuclear.
Sure.
It could be a fusion reactor. It could be some other kind of reaction, energy reaction that we just don't even know about just yet. But I think it's possible that is exactly what it was. And that was a parlay into my last question with you, was going to be ancient alien technology or not. And as a subscriber to the idea that religion is probably crafted from an ancient civilization, alien or not, don't care for me if they're from Earth or if they're from another planet, that came here and was guiding the hand of mankind. Again, you can go down the rabbit hole of did they create us or not. Again, irrelevant for this topic. But I suspect that they potentially fostered this device into the hands of the Israelites for one reason or another. We don't know. They're looked at as this higher level of people, right? Like they could have been the contacts, the communals, the allies of whatever this civilization was,
well,
for whatever the reason might be.
In their eyes, they were the chosen ones, right? These are the chosen people.
Right. And this is a common theme in most religions, is that their religion follows like this is the path. We are chosen for this reason. This is why we're better than all the other religions. And some get more radical about it than others. So I don't know that wasn't necessarily fed to. Again, our friend Todd Feehan would argue that it was crafted, which is a great episode early on too. A couple early 100s, probably 110, 109, which I think 107, 108 was Richard Gage. So it's probably a little after that. Digress. But I do think that whatever this being was could have given us this ark, or given them this ark of power, crafted science, has some sort of degree of power. And then at some point, if they left, if they didn't leave, again, irrelevant to the story, but at some point somebody has to know how, like, let's just bury this thing, because if this gets in the wrong hands, like we would later see in World War II, if something like that was to get in the hands of Adolf, we got hell to pay. So that's the only place I would disagree with you. I think there is a degree of some symbolism in there. And when you're walking around with the box, I think the box is the symbolic aspect. It's the gesture. That's what the angels are sitting on the top of it. There's the symbolism. There's the scare tactic. That's why you're putting the face mask on in football and the dark visor, to scare the shit out of the other guy. But I do think that whatever was inside of that was probably the real power, and there was some sort of a mechanism there. Probably not the Ten Commandments to me, or the tablets, but I think there was something else there. Maybe that was just a thing that they said to keep people from trying to break that sucker open. Yeah,
look, I mean, if it existed, and if it was actually a piece of machinery or a piece of technology, if you will, it had to have been crafted and given to them by someone. And it had to be somebody that was far more advanced than they were, right? So I don't disagree with you as far as that's concerned at all. However, the timeline for me is where I get hung up on that, right? So you mentioned the pyramids, right? So when I look at ancient Egypt and I look at when I look at the pyramids and I look at the temples and I look at the Sphinx, I subscribe to the theory that those were pre Younger Dryas. Those are older than 10 to 12,000 years ago. The Ark of the Covenant takes place about 3,000 years ago, right? So for me, the timeline, there's just a very large gap there. And so if you subscribe to the theory that there was an ancient civilization that was far more superior, or I shouldn't say superior, but far more advanced than school teaches you that they are, well, then the Younger Dryas occurs. That gets all essentially wiped out, right? And then 7,000 years after that, now all of a sudden they have it again. For me, it's just too much of a gap there, and that's where I get hung up on that a little bit as you fumble around with your own arc.
Okay, here we go. I can't find exactly what I was looking for here, but I'm going to find you something here because I want to argue with you right there. I understand wholeheartedly what you're saying, okay? But I'm going to show you something now. This is going to be for all of our YouTubers out there. And our Spotifyers, which, by the way, we've seen those comments you guys are leaving, so keep leaving them.
Yeah.
This is a 500 gigabyte hard drive.
It'd be much better if you held it on camera, though. There you go.
On camera? Well, because your camera's, we're 16 by 9. You're squishing me right now. This is a 500 gigabyte hard drive. Got it? Everyone's familiar with what 500 gigabytes are?
Sure.
This right here, which is going to be very hard for you to see, you can't really see. That's a 1 terabyte. It's twice of this in terms of memory.
Sure.
And look at how much smaller it is. Got it? Technology, as time passes, gets more efficient and it gets smaller. And so when you say that, I am in full agreement with you. However, I also subscribe to the idea that technology gets smaller. It becomes more mobile. And the Ark of the Covenant wasn't powering entire cities. It was powering smaller regional areas. If it was a weapon, it was in a small confined area. And so I think it is plausible for both to still be true, that the ancient Egyptians, they had whatever technologies they had, and the Ark of the Covenant, whether it's a new alien species, the same alien species, or whether it was some sort of a leftover artifact from these earlier times, just a smaller confined device. Just throwing that out there. And obviously these hard drives have gotten smaller and smaller. I mean, mainframe computers used to take up a city block to do a fraction of what that can do. That begs the question now, Mr. Philipps, where is the Ark of the Covenant?
Oh, that is the age-old question, my friend. I'd like to get very rich, so when you find out, if you could please let me know, I'd greatly appreciate it.
And you know what? We're going to find out on our next episode. For now, you can you can subscribe, you can follow us. We're on YouTube, Twitter, X, Spotify. We're on Rumble. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook, conspiracyrealist.com to get all those links really quickly. We're getting ourselves on those other social platforms like Apple Podcast and PodPal and Pocket Pod or whatever the other ones are.
Potty poo.
We're getting on all of them now. We're submitting them. I didn't realize there's a whole other process for that. But we are going to make you guys wait. Like we said, we're going to try to condense these down. We didn't hit our 30-minute mark. We're at 42.
We were close.
But in our next episode, we are going to dive into some ideas on where the Ark of the Covenant is. So subscribe. Stay with us. Until next time, raise your glass to mysteries. This is Cocktails and Conspiracies.